Node application. Oftentimes, the main file for a Node application is named app.js or server.js. To avoid any confusion between our server-side application and our client-side application, I'm going to name this file server.js. The first thing we'll do in this file is bring in the Express module. This gives us the ability to begin working with Express and create our Express application. The next thing I want is an environment variable that I can use in order to determine whether or not I'm in development mode or production mode. Node already has an environment variable that's contained inside of the process.env.node_env. This is going to contain what the environment is if it's been set by Node. The problem is if you don't set your Node environment, then it doesn't have a good default value. So I'm going to create a new variable that will contain this value or a default value. And I'm also going to assign the default value into the node env if it hasn't been set. And I'll use the string development for my default environment name. Next, we'll create our actual Express application. Next, I need to configure a couple settings. In older versions of Express, this would have been done inside of an Express configuration callback. But in Express 4, we just do it in line, which means our configuration section will be next. So the first thing I know I need to configure is my view engine. So I'm going to set the views property, and I'm going to set that to the path where I'm going to hold my views. I also need to set what the view engine will be. Now WebStorm is complaining about a couple of things using these squiggly underlines that you see. I'd like to get rid of those so they're not bothersome noise while I'm developing my application. So in order to do that, I'm going to go into the inspection settings. And I'll go into JavaScript, and underneath General, I'm going to turn off unresolved JavaScript function and unresolved JavaScript variable. And I also want to uncheck the signature mismatch problem. And hit OK. And now I've really cut down on the noise the WebStorm gives me about my JavaScript. The next thing I'll need to do is add a route that delivers my index page. Now in order to create a route for this purpose in Express, I'll just use the app.get function. And typically on something like this, you specify your route with just the /, indicating whenever they go to the root of the website, this is what you want to have happen. But instead of this route, I'm actually going to specify the asterisk. The asterisk will match all routes. That means that any request that gets to this point is going to be handled by this route. That includes JavaScript requests, CSS requests, image requests, everything. Now the reason I'm going to specify this route is because I want the application to deliver my index page whenever any request is made that I don't already have an existing path for. That allows me to set up my client-side routing to handle any route, and I don't have to coordinate with the server and set up the same routes on the client side and on the server side, so that whenever somebody issues a request to the server for a client-side route, the server-side app will just serve up the index page, and then the client-side routing will kick in and show the correct view. For example, if on the client side I created a route called courses, if somebody were to hit refresh on that page, it would issue a GET request to the server. Now the server would have to know about this route, otherwise it won't know what to do. If I tell the server to handle all requests with the index page, then the index page will simply get served up to the client, and then the client-side routing will take over, look at the /courses route, and then show the appropriate view. So it's going to be my client-side application's responsibility to serve up any 404 notices. Now I will warn you that this can be a little bit dangerous. It's fairly easy to get one of your routes wrong, especially by forgetting to put in a leading / and end up in a situation where Angular is either hanging on you or giving you the infinite digests error message. So the other solution is simply to coordinate your routes and make sure that every route you create on the client is also known by the server and able to be handled by the server. We're not going to do this in our application, but it is important for you to know that that is an option. It's far more customary to have your server-side application have a catch-all route that simply serves up a 404 page. So in order to complete this route handler, I also have to give it a callback that will take in the request and response objects and tell the application to render my index view. Now in order for the server to respond and render that view, I've got to create the view file for the server to render. So I'll start by creating my views directory, and within that I'll create an index.jade file. Now you'll notice that WebStorm has indicated that there is a file watcher for Jade available. This file watcher will compile all Jade files into HTML files. This isn't necessary, but it can be nice to debug your Jade files in case you get into some complex Jade code and want to see the rendered file without actually issuing the request and having the server process it. So I'm going to go ahead and let WebStorm add that watcher for me. Now you notice at this point, WebStorm didn't do anything else, it simply added the watcher. If this is the first time you're setting up a Jade watcher in WebStorm, it's actually going to pop up a dialog box. Let's go and see that dialog box ourselves. Here's a list of all of my file watchers, and I'm going to edit the Jade watcher to show you what the dialog box looks like. This is what WebStorm will bring up. Some of these will be filled in, and some of these will be blank. It's these settings down here that you need to know how to configure. So the first thing you need to know is where is your Jade program file. But before you can find that, you'll have to install Jade globally. You watched me install it for this project, but to have the watcher working, you'll also have to install it globally using the -G flag. Once that is done, you will have a command line utility that can be called by the watcher. On Windows, that is inside of your node directory. My path shown here is probably a bit different from yours since I'm using Nodist. If you're on Windows with a typical node install, it's probably something like c:\node. You may need to browse around in your Windows Explorer to locate the CMD file. On my Mac, the path to the command line file is /user/local/bin/jade. In addition to pointing to the correct location for the Jade program file, you're also going to need to specify these arguments correctly, and this is the correct way to specify them. So that's how to configure a Jade file watcher inside of WebStorm. Now I want to create my index view, so I'm just going to create a basic HTML file, and I'll start with the doc type of HTML5. I do that just by typing in the word doc type. In older versions of Jade, you could specify this with 3 exclamation marks and a 5, but current versions of Jade just use the word doc type. If you see the old syntax, don't worry, just ignore it. Now if you're not familiar at all with Jade, Pluralsight's course on Express goes a lot deeper into Jade than I will, so I'm just going to assume that you at least know the basics of Jade, and I'm going to create my HTML tag and my head tag, and inside the head I'm going to put the favicon link. Next I'll create the body, and inside here I'm going to create the very simplest piece I can create and make an h1 tag that prints out the message hello world. Now as of right now, the server won't be able to serve up the favicon that I created here because all routes are going to serve the index.html page. So for the moment I'm just going to comment out this line, but I am going to add that favicon file to the project because we're going to fix that in just a moment. And I'm going to add that to the server. Now we're just about ready to actually show this file in the browser, but we have to do one more thing in our server.js file. We've got to tell the application to start listening to requests. I do that by calling app.listen and passing in the port that I want it to listen to. I'm going to create a variable to hold that port and set it to 3030. And then one more thing I want to do is print out to the console a message so that when I start up the node server, I can see that the server is running and what port it's listening to. And now we're ready to start up our server and run it. So we'll go back to our command line, and in order to start the server, typically you would type in node, and then the name of the JavaScript file that is the entry point for the application, which would be server.js. The problem with doing this is anytime you make changes to your application, you'll have to come back to the command line, stop, and restart your server. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to use the utility called nodemon. This is just a node application that I've installed by using npm install nodemon -g so that it's global, so that I can use it on any of my applications. So instead of using node server.js, I'm going to use nodemon. And you can see that it's printed out my message that it's listening on port 3030. So now let's open this up in a browser and see our application running. And there's the beginning of our application.